Welcome back to ProTalks. I'm your host, Sophie Cochimilio, and I'm thrilled to have Cesar Castro with us today. Cesar is a distinguished and recognized global expert in strategic storytelling and communication, renowned for his ability to transform complex ideas into compelling narratives that captivate audiences. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and dual master's degrees, one in organizational psychology and the other in professional communication. Cesar is also a guest lecturer and instructor in business communication, strategic storytelling, public speaking, and organizational behavior at Weber State and Utah Valley University. Over the years, Cesar has dedicated himself to mastering the craft of storytelling and has become a sought-after speaker, consultant, and trainer for numerous leading companies across the world, including Walmart, PepsiCo, MetLife, Kia, and MasterCard. His personal conviction is that anyone can become an exceptional communicator if they learn to harness the power of stories. So we are thrilled to welcome you today. Thank you, Cesar, for your time, for meeting with me. And us as the student body are really excited to learn everything there is to know about storytelling from you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to be able to share with you, and I know with all the students that are going to be listening to this about storytelling, about communication, and about all the things that might just pop up in our conversation.
Awesome. And I think you didn't mention that bio, but you're ranked 12th in the world in storytelling and communication.
In communication in general, yeah. There's a ranking they do every year, and there's a research company called Global Gurus. And they, grab a lot of information, client testimonies, and just what you're doing in the world. And this year they ranked me number 12.
Number 12.
Number 12.
That's
so we're
no
moving
small
up.
flex. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we were thrilled to listen to you today. And what I hadn't realized prior to meeting you is just how important storytelling is in every aspect, not just to tell cool stories around the campfire, but to captivate audiences and convey your point in the best way possible. I've been listening to your podcast. Everyone, Cesar does have a podcast that is all in Spanish. Luckily, I understand a little bit and have been able to understand more about that, and I'm excited to hear your whole story. Cool. So where did the excitement behind storytelling begin? And let's just hear a little bit about your life story before we go into teaching all of us about it.
Yeah. So one of the typical questions I always get asked, like whenever I go into a job interview, like a job, like a client, a company, they always ask me, why did you get into this? Storytelling is such a unique thing, and it's not something that everyone does. And they always ask me, where did you train? Where did you get certified? What school did you go to learn about storytelling? And my answer is always, I've been training and preparing my whole life for this. And when I tell them that, they're always like, what? Like, it kind of catches them off guard. And I start explaining or sharing with them a story, which I'm going to actually share with you guys too. Because when I was about 7 years old, my family moved to the United States. So I'm originally from Chile, from South America. And my family moved when I was 7. And when we first arrived to the United States, I had absolutely no background, no English background. I couldn't speak. I could probably just count to 3, maybe say hello, goodbye. That was about it. That was my survival. Those were the words that I had for survival. And I started school. I was like in 2nd grade, I think. And I remember that, the teacher, she had a desk right next to her so she could help me because I didn't understand anything. And for the first few months, I'd go to school, sit next to the teacher. I wouldn't talk to anybody because part of my personality, even though people that meet me now are like, no, you're extrovert. No, I'm an introvert. I'm someone who's very shy and like my private space. And I would just go into class, and since I didn't speak the language and I was already really shy and insecure as a kid, I would just literally go in class, look at the ground, and just count as fast as I could. So hopefully the day would go by quick. And I do remember that, every Monday the teacher would be calling. She would call on kids randomly to get up in front of the class, and a lot of them would share stories or talk about something. They would do like show and tell. And I never thought, that's going to happen to me. No way. I don't even speak the language. So about 3 months passed, and I remember Monday morning I get to class early, and I'm sitting there next to the teacher, and she walks up to me. And she had learned a few Spanish words to try to connect with me a little more. And she's like, Cesar, ¿cómo estás? I'm like, I'm bien. And then she says, Cesar, today, to storytell, to contar una historia, to tell a story.
Scary.
and I was like, no entiendo. I don't understand. I was acting like I didn't understand because I didn't want to do that. I knew that she would call kids, and I was like, she's not gonna call on me. I don't speak the language. So I was just saying to her, no entiendo, no entiendo. And I remember she just said, you can do it. And she kind of raised her thumbs, like, you can do it.
I don't understand.
You can do it.
Play.
And she started class.
Yeah.
And she started calling on kids randomly, and she was like on the fourth kid. And I thought, okay, she's not going to call on me because she would usually call about 4 or 5 kids to get up and tell a story. And all of a sudden I hear these words that literally stop my heart. She says, Cesar, it's your turn. It's tu turno. And I just remember standing up and walking to the front of the class. My knees were shaking. My hands were sweaty. Now my heart was racing. And when I get up in front of my class and I look around and I got about 30 little classmates, my mind just went blank. And I couldn't think of anything. And I was probably up there like 10 seconds without saying anything. So you can imagine everyone's attention is like, what is he going to say? And finally I remembered a little story. And it was just a little experience that we had with my family a few weeks back, and we had gone camping. And I just remembered that experience. And I tried the best I could with my Tarzan English that I had at that moment to tell that story. And it probably took about 30, 40 seconds. I felt like I was up there for 10 minutes.
Oh,
but,
I believe
but
it.
it was quick.
Yeah.
And when I sat back down, I just remember that I literally just put my hands on my face, and I was looking at the floor, and I was thinking in my mind, oh, you did such a horrible job. No one liked that story. No one understood what you said. And when I finally got the bravery to look up and look at my classmates, when I looked up, Sophie, all of them were looking back at me, and they all had their thumbs up, like saying, good job, great job. And I share this experience with you, and I've shared it with many people. Again, I share this when I go into companies and they ask me, hey, how did you get into this world? I share this story because that is the first time that I remember that I felt the power of telling a story. And it wasn't even a great story. That's the best part of it. It wasn't even a great story. But I learned in that moment, just having the bravery to get up and speak
For sure.
can create something magical. And from that moment on, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with what communication could do. I fell in love with what public speaking could do. And as I got better, obviously, with the language, I got better at public speaking, and it just became something that it was just part of who I was. And now looking back, I'm 41 now, I look back and I kind of look at my life, and I'm like, everything that I've accomplished and everything that I've been able to do in my life, everything that I've been able to do successfully has been thanks to that ability to communicate and specifically to be able to tell great stories.
Cool. That's an awesome story. And I it sounds like that leads into a lot of why now you find the importance so strong to teach us as college students the importance of storytelling and how to apply it into our lives. So what is, I guess, your main motivation to be teaching at this level?
Well, I remember when I was a college student as well. And for me, college was not easy at first. I grew up here in the States, but then I went back to Chile when I was like 19 and kind of started again in Chile when I was 19. And even though I understood Spanish, I didn't speak that much Spanish because I had grown up here.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to relearn when I was 19 Spanish again, and just going to a new culture, going to a new place, and realizing how powerful when you can communicate, when you can transmit your messages well, what it does, how it generates. Now, I could communicate a lot better then, even though I didn't have the language, but I could communicate, and that helped me to move up really quickly, even in school, be able to create a lot of friends and relationships that have lasted for a long time. And then also, I think when you're a college student, you're at the stage of your life where you're still so moldable. Like you're learning. You want to learn as much as you can about life and about everything. And I believe that is the prerequisite to be able to really learn something, you have to want to learn it. And what tends to happen to us as adults, as we move on and we get older in life, we think we know things. And when you think you know something, that to me is the most dangerous state you can be in, because you stop learning. So I love working with college students because they're in that stage of their life where they're like, I don't know anything. I'm about to start my life, and it's gonna hit me, like a train, and I don't know anything. And I think that out of all the skill sets that you can develop, and you learn a lot of things in college, you obtain a lot of knowledge, but out of all the skill sets, learning to communicate and learning how to be more persuasive and influential with your communication, I think that's by far the most important skill.
Awesome. So now you're taking the time to give back to the community and help us develop that essential skill, which I think is so awesome.
Yeah.
So for those students, those of us that are wanting to better our communication skills and better our storytelling skills, what would you say are the first steps, besides taking one of your classes, which I'm sure would help a ton, but what could we do now to start building that?
So I actually, when I teach storytelling, I teach that there are three pillars. There are three fundamental pillars that you need to get really good at. One of them is learning how to find stories. So I always say that to be a good storyteller, you first have to be a good story finder. And this is where you have to invest a lot of time, because even when you see people give great speeches, or you see them communicate and share stories that are so engaging, and a lot of times you're like, wow, that's incredible. How did he or she do that? It all starts first with finding good stories. So the first thing I always tell my students, even when they're learning how to do business presentations, I teach business presentations here at UVU, I always tell them to have good presentations, you first have to find good stories. Because ultimately 80% of good presentations is telling good stories, knowing how to tell and use good stories effectively in your presentations. So the first pillar is first getting good at recording. And when I say recording, I don't say like you have to write out the whole story, but just getting good at, when things happen in your life, record it. And you can do this on your phone. Actually, on my phone, I have a little place where I take notes.
Yeah.
And it's called Story Bank. That's what I call it. So whenever I have something that happens to me in my day-to-day, something that I think, oh, this would be a good story, this could be an interesting story, I write it down really quick. I just write it in a paragraph. I don't write out the whole story, but I put it in my story bank.
And what I thought was interesting about, one of your podcasts is you focused on that problem that people face is, I want to be good at telling stories, but I don't have any stories to tell.
Yeah.
And so you talked a little bit about using just everyday things that can be turned into metaphors.
Yeah.
How would you relate that to us?
It's very interesting because, again, I teach storytelling in the business world, corporate leaders, and now students as well at universities. And probably the most common, I don't know if to call it an objection, because I don't think it's an objection, but just the first thing everyone always tells me when we start talking about storytelling and good storytelling is they'll say, I don't have good stories. But professor, I don't have good stories. And I think part of it is because we're thinking in our mind that to have good stories, we need to have like Hollywood stories. So you're like thinking in your life, oh, what stories do I have? And I don't have a story where I got lost up in the mountains.
No near-death experiences.
No near death. I didn't survive a plane. I wasn't in a plane accident or something like that. So we're thinking Hollywood. And obviously Hollywood does a great job with their stories that they tell, and that's why they sell millions and we go watch. But I've learned in my personal life that the best stories are not those super extraordinary stories. If you have one, I always tell my clients, if you have one of these very unique, extraordinary stories, come talk to me after and we'll create a keynote for you, and you can travel the whole world telling your extraordinary story. But for 99% of us, and I include myself in this, we just have simple and sincere stories. Simple, sincere stories.
Relatable.
Just relatable, exactly. And just what I shared with you at the beginning, that story of me getting up in front of my class, most people have had an experience similar to that, where they've had to get out of their comfort zone, or they've been in a situation when they're a kid and they're a little uncomfortable, or they've had to get up and talk and speak in front of a group and they feel scared. So when I share that story, I know in a way I'm sharing a story that'll help you connect with me because I'm sharing about my life and I'm being authentic and vulnerable while doing it. But also, when I share my story, you're also hearing your own personal story. And that is one of the powerful effects that stories have. As you tell a story, people are also remembering their own stories.
For sure.
And when you remember your own story, or where you can hear your own story through my story, now we connect. Now you're thinking, oh, Cesar is like me. And when you connect with the storyteller, or you connect with the person who's communicating, now you're much more willing to listen to everything else. So again, I think the first thing we have to focus on to become really good, not only communicators, storytellers, is we have to find stories. And again, they are all over. Every day, they're all over the place. We just have to be good at documenting them. So whenever you have something that happens to you, I always say a story is an emotional experience that happens to a person. So if you go over your whole day in the evening, for example, you go over your day and you start thinking, what emotional experiences did I have today? What emotional experience did happen to me? And you start thinking, oh, today I was doing a podcast and this happened and I got scared or I got nervous, or today in class this happened, or I went to the supermarket and this happened and it created a little bit of anger, or I got a little frustrated. Those emotional experiences are potentially very good stories. So that is the first thing you have to get really good at before anything else.
Finding those stories.
Finding stories.
That first pillar.
That's the first pillar.
Awesome.
That is the first pillar. The second pillar, once you're able to find good stories and have them in your story bank, now the next pillar is you have to learn to craft stories. And a lot of times when we talk about crafting stories, people ask me, well, what is the method that I can use to craft a good story? Because there's so many methods. If you Google how to craft a story, you'll probably have
a million answers.
A million answers. Today, there's probably thousands of websites that talk about storytelling and how to tell good stories. And some are they're great methods, but some are really long. For example, the hero's journey has 21 steps to creating a strategic a good story.
Nobody has time for 21 steps.
No one has steps for that. Maybe someone who's in Hollywood and is creating a 2-hour film on it, maybe, or Pixar. The Pixar has their own storytelling method that they use for their movies that has 17 steps, and today you find there's different names for storytelling, like story doing and story thinking and story selling. And I always tell people, when I think of storytelling, specifically strategic storytelling, I think of just 4 steps. And I actually teach what's called the COSA method whenever I want to help someone craft a good strategic story. And COSA, just so those who are here, if you're bilingual, you'll probably, if you speak Spanish, you'll remember the word COSA means thing. So when I teach this in Spanish, I always tell my clients, I'm going to teach you the most important thing so you can craft a good strategic story.
There you go.
And the great thing is that the word COSA is in a way it's like an acronym just to remember the 4 steps to be able to craft a strategic story. So this is what I teach my clients, and I'm going to teach it here to the students who are going to be listening as well. So the first step to be able to craft a good story, every good story will always start with a context. And a context in simple words is where the story begins. So the story will always have a beginning. And to be able to create a good context, you have to be able to answer 3 questions. When did it happen? Where did it happen? And who did it happen to? So the objective in the context is to start creating the scene so people can start imagining, can start going into the scene with you. And the most important thing is you have to introduce the main character. Because every story, and this is a golden rule of storytelling, every story will always have a main character. If you think you're telling a story and there's no main character, you're not really telling a story. The main character is in a way the vehicle of the story, the one we follow throughout the whole journey. So when I teach you these 3 questions and you're thinking, oh, so when did it happen? Where did it happen? Who did it happen to? It's so simple as, if I'm telling you a story, usually how we would start a story, I'd say something like, hey, you know what? 2 weeks ago, I was walking here in the halls of UVU, and I ran into an old friend who I hadn't seen for about 20 years. His name was John.
Set the stage.
So I set the stage. Now, did I answered the three questions. When did it happen? 2 weeks ago. Where did it happen? Here in the halls. I could be really specific if I wanted to, in the Keller building or here in the student success area. I could be as specific as I want. But in my terms right now, I don't need to be that specific. But I just answered those three questions. When did it happen? 2 weeks ago. Where did it happen? Here in the halls. And who did it happen to? I'm telling you a story, a personal story of me running into a friend, John, who I haven't seen for 20 years. Now, that is just the context. What you want to accomplish or achieve in the context is to create connection. You want people to start connecting with your story, to start resonating with your story.
As fast as possible.
As fast as possible. So usually the context is 15, 20 seconds. It's not that it has to be for a minute or 2 minutes. Now, the thing that you should be thinking in your mind right now, if I've done this correctly, is, okay, and what happened? Right? You ran into John, who you hadn't seen for 20 years. What happened? Okay? And the what happened, that question of what happened will lead us to the second step of crafting a good story, which is the obstacle. There always has to be an obstacle in a story. There always has to be some kind of a conflict, some challenge. It can't be easy. Imagine going to the movies and sitting down and the whole movie's just great things.
Walk right out.
You walk right out, you leave. Because we as human beings, we are attracted to conflict. We're attracted to change, to things that make
the drama of the situation.
The drama of the situation. We need
sure.
drama. Now, I do want to just give one warning here. When I talk about an obstacle, it doesn't have to be life or death. Okay? It doesn't have to be life or death. It can be something so simple as, in my case, when I told the story at the beginning of getting up in front of your class and being scared to speak in public. There's another story I share sometimes where I talk about the time that I had to give my son medication. My youngest son, he was sick, and I had to give him medication. He didn't want to take medication because it's not something that a 5-year-old kid wants to take. And I tell a story of what I had to do to be able to give my son his medication. So the conflict there is I have a 5-year-old who doesn't want to take his medication, and I'm struggling to find out how I can give him his medication. That is not, a Hollywood type of conflict, but it attracts people because first, people have probably gone through something similar. Second, I'm using that story and that conflict as a way to teach you something. It's not that I'm just telling you that story because it's a fun story. I'm trying to teach you something. So this is an important principle when it comes to strategic storytelling. Everything that you're doing, from the context all the way to the end of the story, which I'll share the next few steps in a minute, it's thought of strategically. You're trying to get your audience to a certain place. So it's not you're just giving information to give information.
There's some plan.
There's a plan to it. That's why I teach strategic storytelling, because storytelling is just the art of communicating using stories, and that's something we all do. That's the good news about what I teach, is that we all tell stories, so it's something we all do. Now, learning how to become strategic storytellers, that's a little bit more tricky because most of us don't think of our stories as a strategic vehicle to communicate. So the second step is the obstacle, is the conflict. You always have to have some kind of a conflict or an obstacle. So if we go back to the story that I was sharing, right, 2 weeks ago, I ran into my friend John, who I hadn't seen for 20 years. And to transform this into an obstacle, I would have to say something like, and when I saw John, I say, "Hey, John, how you doing?"
Pretended like he didn't know you.
Or
something crazy.
Or I could say that John looked at me and said, "I'm doing horrible."
Oh, you've got me bought in already.
Yeah, I'm doing horrible. And I didn't know what to say. What would you say in a situation like that? So I asked John, but why are you doing so horrible? And he said, I just lost my job. And I have 3 kids at home and a wife. And I don't know what I'm going to do.
Now every listener is equally as concerned about the situation.
Now we're all what's happening, what's going on. Now, even though I could drag this conflict even longer, right? I could tell you that he got in a car accident and that this and that, and I could drag it and make it even more, give it more drama. But it's going to get to a certain point where in your mind, even though you know that the characters are going through something difficult, subconsciously we're thinking, okay, but there's got to be a way out of this. I don't think Cesar's telling me this story just to make me feel depressed, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be something else. And that leads us actually to the third step, because every story will ultimately have a solution. a solution. That's the third step of this COSA method. The third letter is the S, which means solution. The solution is the happy ending to a story. The solution is where the main character or the characters of the story who are going through the struggle, they have to get out of the struggle. There's got to be a way that they get out of the struggle. If we leave people in the struggle and that's the story, people are going to be left with this feeling of, that can't be the story. There's got to be a happy ending.
It's like when you watch La La Land, get to the end and you're just like, what?
Well, there are movies that do that. And what
breaks
tends to
my
happen
heart.
is people get really mad and they evaluate the movie horribly because they're playing with you. There's something, again, in our subconscious mind that's saying, okay, you can go through all the struggles, you can go through all the difficulties, but there's got to be at the end of this, there's got to be something positive.
for sure.
Whether that be that the main character gets out of the conflict or learns something from the conflict, because we also have stories where maybe there's not the typical happy ending, but we still learn something from the experience.
Yeah.
And the most important thing here in the obstacle is that you have to be able to show the change. There's got to be change. There's got to be some kind of a positive change in the main character of the story. So just with these three steps, I know there's a fourth one and I'll share it with you quick, but the third, just with these three steps, you have a structure for a good story. So just pay attention. You have the context, and the context is to help the audience connect really quickly and just emotionally connect with the story. Get bought in. The second step is the obstacle. And the obstacle is to generate emotion, to create that suspense, that I want to know how this is going to end. And the third step is the solution. The solution is where you leave people on a high note because you show the change. There's got to be a happy ending to the story. Now, there's a fourth step, which to me, this is what creates or what makes this whole process strategic. The fourth step is called the application, or the A for application. And the application, this has to do with the audience. The application is, what is the message or what is the idea that I'm trying to get across to my audience? And again, if we think about strategic storytelling as a vehicle, every story we tell always should lead the audience ultimately to an idea or a message that we're trying to get across that we know will help them, that we know will help the audience. In whatever way we're trying to help the audience, because sometimes we're trying to help them with a message, sometimes we're trying to help them with a product, sometimes we're trying to help them with a service. When I'm teaching, I'm trying to get across an idea that I know will help my students to become better communicators or better professionals. But in the application, that's where we connect the idea or the message to the story. So it's not about just telling a story. It's not about just me telling you a story about what happened in my childhood. It's about using that story as an emotional vehicle to then connect an idea or a message that I know will resonate and will create impact now for that audience. And that is COSA. That is the COSA method, which, again, it's these 4 letters that help you remember the 4 steps. So if you remember it, the C is the context, the O is the obstacle, the S is the solution, and the A is the application. And that is la cosa más importante. That is the most important thing, so you can craft a strategic story.
Perfect. 4 steps is much easier than 21 or 55
a lot easier
to remember. But I think we've all felt the importance of that, listening to some lecture or some speech, that it's always the ones that have powerful stories that resonate with you most that you then remember for longest. I can remember like 3 off the top of my head that had such awesome stories that now their message still I remember to today, and a few of those were years ago.
Yeah.
So super interesting.
There's a lot of research that's been done on this, on the power, the remembering power of stories. And what they've shown is that stories are up to 20 times more memorable than 20 times.
That's crazy.
Than just sharing information or sharing data. So I always tell my students and I tell my clients, look, if you're doing a presentation and there's something that you need the people to remember, there's no going around it. Like, I need them to remember this. You have to insert that into a story, because people remember stories, and we remember stories because stories is not just information. It's information with emotion, and it's that mix of information with emotion that makes our brain retain that information. And ultimately, if you can't get people to remember what you're saying or remember the information, you probably won't have much influence in their actions or their behavior afterwards.
Further down the road.
Yeah.
Super interesting. So what would you say What advice, I guess, would you give to those students who would like to be better communicators, would like to be good storytellers, but maybe don't feel like they have the skill set or that ability quite yet, or don't know how to start developing it? What's your best advice?
So I would suggest two things. First, remember that we are all storytellers already. So sometimes people are like, oh no, that's just a gifted few that can do that. We all tell stories. That's just what we do as human beings. It's part of our human nature to tell stories. And if you don't believe me, just pay attention to yourself when you're with your friends, when you're at a barbecue or Sunday with the family. You're telling stories. You're not talking just bullet points and giving facts and data. Presentation, right? You're telling stories because that's how we communicate. That's the way that we understand the world, is through stories. So the first thing that I want you to remember, and the first advice I'd give you, is you are already a storyteller. It's already in you. So it's
our nature.
It's our nature. So now it's just about improving or getting better at something that you already do. It's like walking or running. You already do it. Now, can you perfect it? Can you get better at it? Of course. Can you get better at running so you can run a long 20-mile marathon? Of course you can get better at it. But you can already run. So starting from there, I think is positive, and it gives us hope, because a lot of times people say to me, oh, I could never do that. I could never get up in front of an audience and tell a story because that's just not me. And I always tell them, you've already done that. First, because you tell stories. And second, when you think of an audience, a lot of people think, oh, audience is 100 people. Audience is one. If you're speaking to one person, you're public speaking.
Interesting. It's true.
Yeah.
I've never thought about that before, but it's true.
When there's one person, you are public speaking. And that is also the great thing about public speaking, is that something you can work on every day, because every day you're speaking to at least one person. So it's something you can work on every single day you have conversations. Since we're not aware of it, like you just said, we're speaking in public every day, but we're not working on becoming better public speakers because we're not even aware that we're doing it.
It's easier to think about it that way rather than everyone in the audience is just in their underwear.
Yeah.
Or something.
No, that doesn't work. That doesn't work very good. And the other suggestion that I'd give you is just to remember that you are always communicating. So people think that communication is just the words that come out of your mouth. And I always tell people, one of the rules, one of the principles of communication is that there's no such thing as no communication.
For sure.
You are always communicating. Even if you're just sitting in a corner at a party, you're communicating, because someone's going to look at you and they're going to interpret. And they're going to say, oh, that person is scared. That person is shy.
They don't like us.
They don't like us.
Yeah, that message is loud.
And why? Because at the end, communication is not just words. It's also our tonality, and it's also our gestures. So when you're just sitting there with your arms crossed, you're communicating something. So I always tell my students, I'm like, look, you can either communicate and not work at it and have people interpret however they want to interpret. And maybe they want to interpret it the best way. Or you can work on your communication, learn how to influence people's perceptions, and get people to interpret you and your messages and your ideas the way that you want them to interpret. Because ultimately, if you can get people to interpret you the way that you want them to interpret you, you'll have much more impact and much more influence.
For sure. Just be more intentional about it.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Excited. Super happy to have this opportunity to share with you and the students.
I think that covered everything that I was hoping that you would cover. The importance of storytelling, how us as college students can learn and apply it, and then understanding that communication isn't something new or that we have to, I guess, hyper fixate on and stress about, when the truth is we're always communicating. It's just how to harness it, how to stay calm and perform our best. So you teach public speaking here.
Yeah.
And I want to say it was organizational behavior.
Yeah. Yes.
Those are the two classes right now.
Yeah. So I teach the professional business presentations class in the marketing department. For those of you who are studying business and want to go into marketing, you'll probably take that class at some point. And then in the organizational leadership department, I teach organizational behavior, which is it's a broad view of just all the different the different behavioral aspects of organizations, and one of them is actually communication. So one of the chapters is we talk about communication, but we also talk about teamwork, we talk about perceptions, we talk about motivation, but ultimately it all in a way connects to how we communicate as well.
For sure. Super interesting. So for any of you out there who have loved this as much as I have and have been super intrigued, you can always take some of Cesar's classes further down the road. And we are hoping to have repeat professors on here. So if you have any other questions, if you have any specific aspects of storytelling that you'd like to pick Cesar's brain at publicly, you can always send those to me, fill out our surveys, and we're looking forward to have you on in the future. Do you have any final pieces of advice, final last words to help out our student body?
Just remember you're always communicating. I think that lesson, once it clicks in your mind that you're always communicating, I think that's a game changer, because it ultimately means that you can get better at it as well. If you're always doing something, you can get better at it if you just work at it with more intention and just being more conscious of what you're doing when you're communicating. And ultimately, that's why I love teaching communication, because sometimes it's little changes that can just create a huge, huge impact in the way we communicate and in the way we influence others with our messages and with our ideas.
For sure.
So thank you for the invitation. And if the students have questions, I hope I can come back and keep helping and adding more value in what I think is the most important skill that we can develop, which is our way to communicate.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to have you back. Thank you so much for your time, for joining us today. And ProTalks listeners, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in the future. Peace out.